For 19 winters, Rowena sat trembling on ice-cold stone in the eastern tower, locked away in darkness by the hand of her own father. To the Silver Pine Pack, she was something unspeakable. A wolf born without a single trace of scent, buried alive so her golden-haired sister could shine as the rightful heir. They left her to decay in silence. But when Alpha King Kylan, the most feared warlord the realm had ever known, drove his colossal army to their gates and demanded a bride, her father's perfect deception began to fracture. Alderic intended to present the king with his prized daughter. He had no idea the ruthless Alpha would only ever kneel before the scentless prisoner rotting in the attic. Deep in the northern reaches of the Oakhaven Kingdom, where winters showed no mercy and pine forests grew dense enough to devour the sun, Blackwood Keep loomed against the sky. A fortress carved from dark stone and blunt, savage architecture, home to the Silver Pine Pack. For generations, the Silver Pine Wolves had been renowned for raw strength and iron pride. They were a people shackled to the laws of nature, governed by lunar phases, and ruled above all else by the sacred power of scent. Among wolves, scent was soul. It carried lineage, emotion, dominance, and truth. To exist without one was to exist as an abomination. Rowena entered this world in absolute silence. When the late Luna Beatrice delivered her firstborn on a moonless night, the midwife stumbled backward in horror. The infant made no sound. She carried none of the rich, loamy fragrance of a newborn pup. She smelled of nothing at all, like cold water sliding over bare stone. And when the child finally opened her eyes, they held no trace of silver pine gold or amber. They burned a sharp, impossible violet. Alpha Alderic, a man whose ambition ran neck and neck with his vanity, was consumed by dread. Pack elders murmured of an ancient curse, a hallowed one, dispatched by dark spirits of the old world to shred the pack from within. They insisted the child be abandoned in the frozen woods. That was the brutal, age-old custom for the cursed. But Alderic, driven perhaps by some thin thread of mercy or a darker instinct of ownership, could not destroy his own blood. So he built a lie instead. The pack was informed the firstborn had died in the night. A small, hollow casket was set ablaze on a pyre. The pack grieved, and while they mourned, Rowena was carried up the winding, treacherous stone staircase of the eastern tower, a wing of the keep left abandoned for 100 years. She was given a single room, a barred window, a life sealed in total isolation. 19 years crawled past. Rowena grew from a silent, terrified child into a striking, solitary woman. Those violet eyes carried the sharp intelligence of someone who had studied the world entirely from the outside. Her days were spent buried in ancient tomes, delivered by Liana, a deaf and mute servant, the only living soul permitted to cross her threshold. Rowena understood the histories of the werewolf kingdoms more deeply than the scholars who had written them, yet she had never once felt grass beneath her bare feet. Below her tower, life pressed forward without her. Her mother, Beatrice, died of a shattered heart not long after Rowena's birth. Alderic remarried quickly and sired a second daughter, Genevieve, the perfect golden child. Engineered to erase the shameful secret locked above, Genevieve was everything Rowena was not. Loud, vibrant, drenched in the scent of sweet honeysuckle and fierce alpha blood. Hair like molten gold, amber eyes that seized the attention of every unmated male in the territory. From her high window, Rowena watched Genevieve tear through the courtyards, spar with warriors, and begin to entertain suitors. Rowena felt no jealousy, only a deep, hollow ache. She was a ghost haunting her own existence. A spectator to a world her very biology had locked her out of. But the fragile quiet surrounding Blackwood Keep was cracking apart. Far to the south, the Ironfang court had swelled to a power no one had seen before. Alpha King Kylan, the sovereign they called the Black Wolf of the Valleys, had spent 5 relentless years crushing the fractured territories of Oakhaven beneath his heel. Kylan was a warlord, built from nightmare. He did not bargain. He commanded. Pack after pack had crumbled before his armies, their alphas dragged to their knees or stripped of their heads. Now word reached Blackwood that Kaelin's enormous force was marching north. They hadn't come to raise the north, they'd come to claim it. King Kaelin's terms were plain. Northern packs could keep their territories, but only under absolute fealty, a crushing tithe of iron and timber, and a political hostage to guarantee compliance. For Alpha Alderic, surrendering a hostage reeked of submission. But offering a bride, that was strategy. A doorway to placing his own blood on the high throne. He chose Genevieve without hesitation. When the banners of the Iron Fang court crested the horizon, black cloth stamped with the silver jawbone, Blackwood Keep erupted into chaos. Rowena sat on the frigid stone of her tower floor. Her cheek rested against the iron bars of her window. Below, the massive host advanced. Even at this distance, the raw authority pouring from the king's vanguard set the air humming. Static prickled across her skin. She didn't know it yet, but the cage Alderic had built to bury his shame was about to shatter. The courtyard of Blackwood Keep buckled beneath the Iron Fang vanguard. Dire wolves, twice the size of Alderic's strongest warriors, stalked near the gates, restless and enormous. The air hung dense with pine, leather, sweat, and a dominance so thick it coated the tongue. Alpha King Kaelin rode at the head of the column. He dismounted his warhorse in one fluid motion, graceful for a man that size. A mountain wrapped in dark armor, every plate etched with runes of the old tongue. His face was hewn rough, a scar cut across his jawline, some long ago battle's signature. His eyes burned an impossible, glacial gray. The aura rolling off him was suffocating. Several silver pine guards bared their throats involuntarily as he passed. Alderic waited at the foot of the keep steps. Branwick flanked his left side. Genevieve, golden and gleaming, stood at his right. Alpha King Kaelin! Alderic's voice carried over the wind, loud enough, though his spine curved with an instinctive, unwilling deference. Kaelin's pale gaze slid over Alderic. Then it landed on Genevieve. She wore crimson silk, elaborate and impractical. A tremor ran through her from the cold. Her chin was lifted, a careful performance of royalty. Kaelin's nostrils flared, ambition, vanity, and beneath the heavy syrupy perfume designed to smother it, her true scent. His voice came low, rough, like stone dragged across stone. Alderic's reply slid out smooth as oil. He gestured toward the great hall. But surely, terms discussed over meat and mead endure longer than demands made in the cold. Cedric stepped forward, towering, red-haired, one hand resting easy on his broadsword's hilt. Kaelin raised a palm. Cedric stopped. Kaelin's eyes didn't blink. The banquet that followed was a spectacle of frantic excess. Hundreds of tallow candles blazed across the great hall, whole roasted boars, venison drowned in wine, platters of winter-root vegetables paraded one after another. Musicians played loud, desperate melodies, anything to blanket the tension choking the room. Kaelin occupied the head of the table. He barely touched his food. His face gave away nothing. Genevieve had been placed beside him. She poured his wine, leaned close. Her scent pulsed with a sickly, eager sweetness. Quote 7. Her voice dropped to a purr. One finger traced the rim of her goblet. Quote 8. Kaelan turned those grey eyes on her. Inside him, his wolf, ancient, feral, vast, lay perfectly still. Not a flicker, no pull, no spark, not the faintest hum of recognition. Her cloying perfume was building behind his temples like a dull ache. Quote 9 __. His voice landed cold and final. His gaze drifted back to the crowded hall. Quote 10. Genevieve's smile cracked at the edges, turned brittle as old glass. Alderic caught it, The stumble, the silence stretching a beat too long. He snapped his fingers toward the bards. The music surged louder. Far above the feast, in the frozen dark of the eastern tower, Rowena paced. Bass drums from the great hall hammered through stone, and their rhythm invaded her chest like a second heartbeat. 19 years she had accepted this existence, the quiet ghost, the invisible daughter. Tonight something had shifted. The air crackled, dense, electric, pulling at her bones with a gravity she couldn't name. Liana, her mute servant, had gone hours earlier to help in the kitchens. In her rush, rattled perhaps by the overwhelming presence of the Iron Fang wolves, she hadn't driven the heavy deadbolt fully home. Rowena stopped mid-pace. She stared at the oak door. Thick, ancient. She crossed the room and pressed her palms flat against the wood. Nothing. She threw her full weight into it, shoulder, hip, everything she had. The bolt screamed free, rusted metal shrieking through the silent corridor like a crack of thunder. The door groaned open. Beyond it, a spiral staircase swallowed in blackness. Rowena's lungs seized. Freedom, raw and terrifying. Discovery meant death. Alderic would not hesitate. He'd call her an intruder, a witch, execute her before the king's own eyes to keep his secret buried. But the drums below had found her pulse. They beat together now, one tempo, one insistence. She glanced down at herself. Undyed wool, no shoes, no blade, only shadows. She told herself, crossing the threshold into the frozen corridor. Her car feet descended the spiral steps without a whisper against the ice-slicked stone. She moved by memory, ancient blueprints she'd memorized in her tower prison, threading through servants' passages and abandoned cellars, avoiding every lit corridor. She was a phantom, undetectable. Because she carried no scent at all, the Iron Fang guards posted at every junction never so much as twitched when she drifted past the tapestries at their backs. To a werewolf, danger announced itself through smell before sound. Rowena offered neither. At last she found a heavy wooden door opening onto the western gardens. A forgotten courtyard strangled with dead briar roses and brittle winter ivy. She pushed through. The night hit her like a blade. Cold so sharp it carved the breath from her throat. She dropped to her knees in frost-crusted grass, drove her fingers into frozen soil, and wept without sound. The raw, overwhelming sensation of earth beneath her hands. Above her, stars blazed across an open sky, no iron bars, no narrow window. For the first time in her life, she felt real. She was not alone. The banquet had finally become unbearable for Kaelan. Alderic's political theater, Genevieve's clawing desperation thick enough to taste, the suffocating heat of bodies pressed into stone walls, all of it had scraped his nerves raw. He needed cold. He needed silence. He left Cedric watching the hall and slipped through a side door, following the stone corridors until he reached the abandoned western courtyard. Freezing mountain wind cut across his face, exactly what his restless wolf demanded. He settled against a crumbling statue, closed his eyes, and exhaled slowly. The conquest was all but finished. Oak Haven belonged to him now. The victory tasted like ash. 28 years old, an alpha king with no queen. He had never found his mate, and without a true Luna, an alpha's rule remained fractured at its core. The pack needed that balance, that counterweight to his aggression. Genevieve was not even a consideration. He'd sooner bond with a common foot soldier than chain himself to that kind of hollow ambition. A sound cracked his eyes open. Fabric brushing dead leaves. Soft, almost nothing. Kaelan dropped low, claws sliding from his fingertips, eyes igniting to molten silver. He inhaled hard, throwing his senses wide to find the source. Nothing. He drew a deeper breath, chest expanding to its limit. Still nothing. No sweat, no adrenaline, no metallic bite of fear, no earthy musk of wolf, not even the flat mundane scent of a human body. only frost, only dead roses. But he could hear breathing, shallow, erratic, unmistakable. An assassin, had to be. Old world dark magic, some spell woven to erase a killer's presence entirely. Every muscle in Kailan's body coiled tight as braided steel. He traced the breath to its source, crouched behind a dense tangle of wild briar. In one explosive movement, Kailan launched himself through the thorns. Massive hands seized the hidden throat before the figure could draw another gasp. He drove the small, brittle body against the keep stone wall. His fist closed around the neck so slender his fingers nearly overlapped. He lifted the intruder clean off the ground. "Who sent you?" The words came out guttural, almost inhuman. The figure thrashed, nails raking uselessly at his forearm. Kailan squeezed harder. He stepped into the moonlight, dragging his captive with him. His lungs stopped working. A woman, pale as parchment under the silver light, drowning in a filthy woolen shift with no dye and no shape. Her feet hung bare beneath her, torn, bleeding from the briar. But her frailty wasn't what locked the Alpha King in place. Her eyes, wide, flooded with terror, the color of crushed amethysts, violet irises burning with a desperate, feral glow. Then something broke inside him. Kailan's inner wolf, that savage, gore-drenched predator who had torn through hundreds of men, who bent for no living creature, who held an entire kingdom in the grip of primal fear, collapsed. It didn't snarl. It didn't rage. It let out a sound Kailan had never heard from it. A whimper, small, broken, submissive. The beast threw itself against the walls of his consciousness, not to attack, to surrender. Mate. The word detonated through his skull, ripped through every rational thought he possessed. Impossible. The mate bond was scent-driven, a chemical and spiritual lock meeting its key. This woman carried no scent at all. She was a void, an absence where a person should be. Yet the instant their gazes collided, a shock wave ripped through his nervous system. A tether of molten iron fused between his chest and hers in one violent, irreversible instant. Kailan released her. Rowena crumpled onto the frozen grass. She choked, clawed at her bruised throat, dragged air into damaged lungs. She scrambled backward on her hands until the dirt pressed cold against her spine. Her heart slammed against her ribs, frantic, caged. She looked up. He towered above her. His eyes had bled back to stormy gray, but they were wide, fractured with shock, confusion, and something darker, something possessive. "What are you?" Kailan's voice was barely a breath. He took one slow step toward her. He couldn't smell her. It defied every law his nature obeyed. Yet his wolf was screaming at him to kneel, to bare his throat to this barefoot, shivering girl. "Please!" Rowena's voice came out raw, scraped thin by years of silence and the crushing force of his grip. Kailan went still. Her voice traveled down his spine like a blade drawn slowly across skin. He lowered himself to a crouch, folding his massive frame down to her level. His hand reached for her face. It trembled. He had never trembled, not once in his entire life. His fingers caught her chin, tilted it toward the moon. __quote _17___. He said it quietly, reading the aristocratic cut of her cheekbones, the silver blonde hair spilling wild and tangled past her shoulders. Rowena shut her eyes tight, braced for the blow, for the revulsion. Kailan's mind tore through old memories, buried whispers from nearly 2 decades past. The firstborn daughter of Alderic and Beatrice, born dead, called an omen. "You are not a ghost," he murmured. His thumb drifted across her pulse point. The frantic hammering beneath her skin became the most intoxicating rhythm he had ever known. "You are the firstborn." "I am nothing," Rowena whispered. A single tear carved a line down her hollow cheek. "I am the hollowed one." A growl rolled through Kaelan's chest, low, territorial, ancient. The full weight of it struck him like a battering ram. What Alderic had done. The Alpha of Blackwood had imprisoned his true mate in a stone cage for 19 years. Had buried a queen inside a tower because he was too blind to comprehend her nature. Rowena flinched at the sound, but no strike came. Instead, Kaelan slid one arm beneath her knees, the other behind her back. He lifted her against his chest as if she weighed nothing at all. She panicked, thrashed against the cold plates of his armor. Kaelan's voice rang out, absolute, iron-forged, terrifying in its certainty. The shock bled away. What replaced it was something colder, a killing rage aimed squarely at the Alpha of Blackwood. Kaelan drew Rowena closer, pressing his face into her hair. She carried no scent, but she felt like the entire world. He offered me a bride tonight to save his kingdom. He simply didn't know which daughter I intended to take. What are you doing? Rowena's voice broke with terror as Kaelan turned from the darkness and drove straight toward the heavy timber doors leading back into the keep. Kaelan said, his eyes blazed silver again. He did not smuggle her back to her tower. He did not conceal her in his quarters. Alpha King Kaelan drove his boot through the oak doors of the western wing and stormed the main corridor, carrying the barefoot, shaking, cursed secret of Blackwood Keep straight toward the Great Hall, prepared to reduce Alderic's entire world to ash. The Great Hall of Blackwood Keep was a spectacle of indulgence. Raucous laughter crashed against the walls. Goblets rang like war bells. Lute strings shrieked under frantic fingers. Genevieve sat poised in the middle of a careful, musical laugh, her fingers resting dangerously near the empty chair Kaelan had abandoned. Then, the iron-banded doors at the far end of the hall detonated inward. The impact was thunderous. Heavy wood met stone with such violence that a tapestry ripped from its moorings and crumpled to the ground. Every lute string went silent. Laughter died mid-breath in the throats of Silverpine warriors. Hundreds of luminous eyes locked on the entrance. Alpha King Kaelan entered the hall. He did not walk. He seized the room with each stride. His alpha aura crashed outward like a tide, so dense and suffocating that lesser wolves buckled to their knees, whimpering, every instinct shrieking submission. But it was not the king's devastating presence that made Alpha Alderic's golden goblet slip from his fingers. Wine splashed across the high table like spilled blood. It was what Kaelan carried. Cradled against his dark, rune-carved armor lay a frail, barefoot woman draped in a ragged, undyed shift. Silver blonde hair spilled over Kaelan's arm. She trembled visibly, her face buried against his chest, hiding from the sudden blaze of 100 candles and the predatory weight of 100 stairs. Genevieve rose to her feet. Crimson silk whispered in the dead silence. Her voice wavered. Her nose twitched, searching for the scent of the woman in his arms. She found nothing. Every drop of color fled Alderic's face. His skin turned the gray of old ash. His chest heaved as pure, uncut panic crushed his heart. 19 years of lies. 19 years of meticulous deception now pressed against the chest of the most lethal man on the continent. Gods! Alderic erupted, his voice splitting with desperation. A shaking finger stepped toward Kaelan. That woman is feral, a cursed stray that wandered into the keep. Remove her from the king at once. She is dangerous. A dozen Silverpine warriors unsheathed their swords and edged forward, caught between their alpha's command and the suicidal reality of approaching the Black Wolf of the Valleys. They never managed the second step. Cedric, Kaelan's beta, unleashed a roar that shook soot from the rafters. 50 Iron Fang soldiers drew broadswords in perfect, practiced unison. The shriek of steel flooded the hall, a promise of total annihilation. Cedric planted himself between the Silverpine guards and his king. Golden eyes burned with killing intent. "Sheath your steel," he said, quiet as a blade sliding free, "or I will feed you your own hearts. Personally." The Silverpine warriors went rigid. Their eyes darted back to Alderic in open panic. Kylan paid the drawn weapons no attention. His gaze never left Alderic as he marched down the center aisle, stopping at the foot of the high table. He lowered Rowena gently to her feet, but one massive arm stayed locked around her waist, pulling her tight against his side. Rowena kept her eyes fixed on the stone floor. The sheer noise of the room, the crushing wall of roasted meat, sweat, fear, and raw aggression, it paralyzed her completely. 2 decades of absolute silence had not prepared her for this. The world tilted beneath her. She grabbed hold of the only steady thing left, the furnace-hot wall of the king's body. Kaelan's voice dropped to a whisper sharper than any blade. "Astray." "Yes, my king." Alderic's lie came through clenched teeth. Kaelan said, cold as iron, without so much as a glance toward the golden-haired girl. Genevieve's mouth fell open. Her face flooded a deep, bruised purple as laughter rippled through the iron-fang ranks. Kaelan extended one hand, pressing a single finger beneath Rowena's chin. He lifted her face toward the light, toward every pair of eyes in the hall. Sharp gasps cut through the older wolves of the Silverpine pack. The elders, those who had stood in the birthing chamber when Beatrice labored, stared with open horror. Kaelan's voice swelled to a commanding roar that pinned every soul in the room. "Look at the violet eyes of the true Silverpine bloodline. The eyes of your dead mate, Beatrice." Whispers exploded from every corner. "Impossible," one ancient elder breathed, gripping his cane with white knuckles. "The firstborn perished, she was burned." "You burned an empty coffin, old fool," Kaelan snarled. His gaze swept the hall like a scythe before locking back onto the shaking Alpha. "Your leader imprisoned his firstborn daughter in a frozen tower for 19 years, because she carried no scent, because she terrified him, because he was too craven to shield his own blood from your superstitious filth." Alderic's fists crashed against the table. 48-49. Calum thundered, his silver eyes blazing so bright they threw light across the stone walls. Silence crashed down like a hammer. Rowena lifted her gaze to him, her breath locked in her chest at what she found, raw, unguarded devotion burning in that monstrously beautiful face. __quote _51__. The words struck the stone floor like falling anvils. The hall erupted. A scentless mate, it defied biology itself. The bond was forged through pheromones, through the primal hum of spiritual scent. Yet the conviction pouring off the Alpha King was absolute. His wolf had bound itself, violently, permanently, to the fragile creature at his side. Alderic's lip curled. A reckless, suicidal gleam lit his eyes as he tasted the shape of his own political destruction. "You came for an alliance. Take the cursed one, and you take her as Blackwood's enemy. We will never bow to a king who beds a demon." Kaelan laughed, low, dark, rumbling. The sound scraped against bone. "Alderic, you have profoundly misread the nature of this visit. I did not come to request your loyalty. I came to inform you that your lands already belong to me." He turned to Cedric. "Disarm every Silverpine guard. Any man who lifts a hand dies where he stands. Drag Alderic to the dungeons of his own keep. Let him learn what darkness tastes like." "You cannot!" Alderic's hand flew to the sword at his hip. He never cleared the scabbard. Cedric launched over the high table with terrifying speed, driving the pommel of his blade into Alderic's temple. The Alpha of Blackwood folded to the floor like a puppet severed from its strings. Genevieve shrieked, stumbling backward. The Silverpine guards watched their Alpha collapse. They looked at the Iron Fang army filling the hall. One by one, weapons clattered against stone. The sound rang out like a death knell for the Blackwood dynasty. Kaelan looked down at Rowena. Those wide violet eyes held a shock too vast for words. In 5 minutes, this terrifying warlord had broken her father, swallowed her pack whole, and incinerated the prison she had known for her entire life. "Come, my queen." His voice shed every edge, soft now, only for her. He unfastened his heavy cloak, fur-lined, dark velvet, and swept it around her trembling shoulders. His warmth folded over her. Pine and weather filled her lungs. "We are leaving this cursed place. You will never look upon these walls again." They rode through the black hours of night, and the towering, suffocating shadow of Blackwood Keep shrank behind them until it was nothing at all. Cailan wouldn't spend one more hour inside the fortress that had served as his mate's grave. The Ironfang vanguard pressed hard through snow-heavy pine forests, their massive direwolves carving a trail toward the southern valleys. Rowena rode in Cailan's personal carriage, a heavily armored thing lined with thick bear pelts, warmed by a small iron stove bolted to the floor. She wore an oversized tunic he'd given her. Her feet, for the first time, were wrapped in warm, fur-lined boots. She pressed her face close to the small glass window. Moonlight poured across the forest canopy. The sheer vastness of everything beyond that glass was almost unbearable. Every tree, every shadow, every single star, a revelation. 19 years she had read about this world from a tower. Now it was rushing past her like a river she'd fallen into. Cailan occupied the seat across from her, his enormous frame swallowing most of the space. He watched her with a quiet, fierce reverence. His inner wolf, that restless, savage thing forever demanding blood and territory, lay completely still. Curled in the depths of his mind, purring like a tamed hound. All because she breathed the same air. Quote, _59__. Cailan said at last. His deep voice split through the steady rumble of carriage wheels. Rowena flinched, pulling her gaze from the window. She stared at him, still unable to reconcile it. This terrifying king, a man who had broken kingdoms and shattered her father with a single command, now looking at her as though she were made of spun glass. Rowena answered softly. Her voice was still rough, but underneath it carried a delicate, musical cadence. He corrected. Gently. Rowena drew the fur cloak tighter around her thin frame. Her voice dropped. Cailan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He reached out, one large calloused hand gently swallowing both of hers. Quote 66. He paused. Quote 67. 2 days passed before the vanguard reached Highcross Keep, a towering, impregnable fortress marking the edge of Ironfang territory. Here, Cailan sent for Agatha. She was the oldest living member of the Ironfang pack, blind seer, chief healer, a woman whose knowledge of werewolf biology and ancient magic exceeded anything committed to parchment. Frail and hunched, milky white eyes staring at nothing, she leaned hard on a carved yew staff. When she was escorted into the king's private chambers, where Rowena sat nervously beside a roaring hearth, the old woman froze in the doorway. "Leave us, Cedric," Agatha commanded the beta who had brought her. Her voice scraped like dry leaves dragged across stone. Cedric bowed and withdrew. Only Cailan, Rowena, and the blind healer remained. Agatha did not approach Rowena right away. She stood at the threshold, nostrils flaring, head tilting side to side, as though tracking a frequency neither Cailan nor Rowena could perceive. "Extraordinary," Agatha breathed. Her white eyes stretched wide. She hobbled forward and dropped to her knees before Rowena's chair. Cailan stiffened, stepping closer. A dry, barking laugh escaped the old woman's throat. "Fix her? My king, you asked me to fix the sun for shining too brightly." Her trembling, wrinkled hands rose. They hovered inches from Rowena's face, tracing an aura she could feel but never see. Cailan said, frowning hard. Agatha replied, her voice thick with awe. Her hands trembled near Rowena's skin. "This child, she smells of the ether." Rowena turned to Kylan, bewildered, then back to the old woman. The ether? What does that mean? It means, precious child, that you are a null, Agatha whispered, her hands falling slack into her lap. A legend I believed extinct, wiped out 500 years ago in the first purge. You see, in the ancient age, the mightiest Alpha Kings were driven to madness. Rival pack-scents clawed at their minds. The crushing weight of their own dominance fractured them from within. Their lunas became prey, hunted for the power radiating from their scent alone. But nature is cunning, my king. To shield the purest, most essential lunas and anchor the most devastating alphas, nature forged the null. Her scent is seamless, perfectly invisible. It hums on a spiritual frequency that dissolves aggression, smothers panic, and extinguishes madness entirely. She is the living shield. Kylan's gaze locked onto Rowena. Every fragment snapped into place at once. The garden. He remembered it now with brutal clarity. His wolf had been savage that night, clawing, thrashing, poisoned by the feast's chaos. But the instant his skin met hers, the instant their eyes connected, a stillness had flooded through him so deep it felt holy. She hadn't merely ignited the mate bond. She had drowned the hurricane in his veins. Quote _81 __. The name left Kylan's throat like a snarl wrapped in venom. He thought she was a curse. Alderic is a blind fool who wouldn't recognize a diamond even as it sliced his own throat open. Agatha's voice dripped with contempt. Her weathered hand found Rowena's knee and rested there gently. You, my queen, are the rarest gift the Iron Fang court will ever know. With an ether luna beside him, the king's mind will never splinter beneath his crown's weight. You are not broken. You are what our kind was always meant to become. Rowena couldn't move. 19 years. For 19 years, she had swallowed the poison they fed her. That she was defective, monstrous, a diseased limb on a noble bloodline. She had accepted, bone deep, that she deserved neither love, nor sunlight, nor the breath in her own lungs. And now, wrapped in the heavy furs of an Alpha King, seated in a warm room that smelled of cedar and fire, she was hearing that she was myth made flesh. The tears came, scalding and relentless. 19 years of carefully mortared walls inside her chest collapsed all at once. Her hands flew to her face, and a broken raw sob ripped free from somewhere deeper than her throat. Kylan dropped to his knees before her in a single motion. He pried her hands away and crushed her against the broad wall of his chest. No words. He offered none. He just held her, while 19 years of grief and exile and shame poured out against his armor. His face pressed into her silver blonde hair. He breathed in deeply. There was no honeysuckle, no pine, no rain. But Agatha had spoken true. What he smelled was peace. Total, immovable, bone-deep peace. Kylan murmured against her hair, his arms drawing tighter. The march south toward Ethelgard, the Iron Fang court's seat of power, consumed a full fortnight. And in those 14 days, the world Rowena had only glimpsed through crumbling, yellowed manuscripts came alive before her eyes. The brutal pine forests of the north softened into vast emerald valleys. Rivers roared through stone gorges. Sprawling villages lined the roads, their people bowing low beneath the black and silver banners of King Kylan. Day by day, the barefoot, trembling girl who had survived in Blackwood Keep's darkest corners grew harder to find. Beneath Kylan's relentless devotion, Rowena transformed. He clothed her in gowns of deep violet and black velvet, colors that made her pale hair glow and her striking eyes burn. But the gowns were the least of what he gave her. He listened. When Kylan convened war councils with his generals along the march, he demanded Rowena's chair beside his heavy oak seat. The Iron Fang court commanders bristled at first, this silent, scentless woman with no standing. Their skepticism died quickly. 19 years locked away in Blackwood Keep had made Rowena a scholar of terrifying depth. She knew Oakhaven's history, its terrain, its forgotten treaties, all of it consumed by a starving mind with nothing but rotting parchment for company. Her strategic instincts cut like polished steel, yet the darkness she had fled was not finished with her. On the 12th night, as the vanguard settled among the crumbling bones of an ancient amphitheater, a lone Iron Fang court scout tore into camp on horseback. His direwolf heaved beneath him, grey fur slick with sweat, crusted dark with old blood. Kalen emerged from the command tent immediately. His arm swept around Rowena, pulling her behind him like a reflex. "Report," he ordered. His voice cracked against the stone ruins like thunder. "My king!" the scout choked out, half falling from his horse before his knee struck the frozen ground. "Betrayal from the north. Alpha Alderic still rots in the dungeons, but his daughter Genevieve has slipped her chains. She did not run alone. She has bound herself to what remains of the Chastel mercenaries." A guttural growl swept through the Iron Fang court encampment like wildfire. Rowena knew that name in her bones. Antoine Chastel was no legend whispered around hearth fires. He was documented horror. His private journals, his catalogued butcheries against lycanthropes in the 18th century French province of Gévaudan, these were recorded fact. The Chastel bloodline had persisted for centuries as a merciless syndicate of rogue hunters and exiled wolves. Their trade was dark alchemy, poisoned blades, silver-laced death. They were the shadow that kept werewolf nobility awake at night. Genevieve had offered them the Blackwood armories and a permanent seat at her council, in exchange for reclaiming the north. The scout pressed on, voice cracking under strain. "They are not waiting for our departure, my king. A trap has been laid in the Whispering Gorge. Their aim is to cut you down and seize the Ether Luna, to bleed her dry and sell what flows in her veins on the black market." Kylan's eyes ignited, a scalding, killing red. The atmosphere in the camp collapsed under the weight of his fury, thick and suffocating with lethal intent. Quote __90, quote _91. Rowena murmured, pressing her small, warm palm over his white-knuckled fist. The effect was immediate. That crushing, savage pressure pouring off the king dissolved on contact, swallowed whole by her ether nature. Soldiers who had been baring their throats in raw submission to his wrath suddenly inhaled, deep, grateful breaths flooding back into their lungs. Quote _92, Rowena observed. Her voice carried an unnatural calm, a stillness so absolute it unsettled even the war-scarred veterans watching her. Kylan asked, gazing down at her. Every soldier present could see it. Total, unconditional trust. Rowena commanded, her violet eyes tracing the ancient maps spread across a nearby table. The strategy was savage, elegant, flawless. Kylan smiled, a slow, predatory flash of fangs that promised absolute annihilation. The next dawn unfolded exactly as Rowena had foreseen. Kylan rode into the narrow, fog-strangled Whispering Gorge with only 20 riders at his back. The cliffs detonated. Grappling hooks and weighted nets came screaming down. Crossbow bolts followed, each tip gleaming with liquid silver. Genevieve stood on the precipice above, cloaked Chastel killers flanking her on both sides. She shrieked, her features twisted into something grotesque with envy and hatred. But the Iron Fang decoy held formation, raising heavy iron shields overhead. Before Genevieve could command a second barrage, the eastern reach erupted with a sound that shook stone. 200 iron-fanged warriors, roaring in perfect, horrifying unison. Cedric drove the charge downward, crashing into the mercenaries like an avalanche of fur and sharpened steel. The ambush inverted into a slaughter. The Chastel fighters, never prepared for a flanking assault at this scale, were shredded where they stood. Through the carnage, Genevieve scrambled down the rocky slope, clawing at stone, frantic to outrun the butchery closing in behind her. Her eyes found Kalen. He had dismounted. He was walking toward her, slow, unhurried, each step carrying the inevitability of death itself. Panic seized her. Genevieve ripped a glass vial from beneath her cloak, Chastel forged, packed with concentrated wolfsbane and silver vapor, and hurled it straight at Kalen's chest. Glass shattered against his armor. Poisonous green mist erupted outward, swallowing the Alpha King whole. Kylan roared, a sound torn from somewhere primal, and dropped to one knee. The dark alchemy scorched his lungs, blistered his skin, crushed his inner wolf into silence. Genevieve drew a dagger. She lunged for the crippled king. She never reached him. A shape materialized from the thinning fog, planted directly between the fallen king and the unhinged princess. Rowena. She had refused the safety of camp, riding hidden among the decoy force. "Move, you cursed freak!" Genevieve shrieked, slashing the dagger at Rowena's face. Rowena didn't flinch, didn't retreat. 19 years beneath this woman's vanity, 19 years under her father's brutality. Her hand shot out, impossibly fast, fingers locking around Genevieve's wrist with a force that contradicted every fragile inch of her. "I am not cursed." The whisper came low, almost gentle. Her violet eyes blazed with blinding, otherworldly light. Ether energy erupted from her core. A shockwave of crystalline air tore outward in every direction. It slammed into the lingering wolfsbane cloud and annihilated it, transforming lethal green vapor into harmless morning dew. Genevieve yanked backward, desperate. Rowena held firm. "You are nothing but a frightened child playing with monsters, Genevieve, and I am done being afraid." One swift, precise motion, borrowed from weeks of watching Kalen's soldiers drill, and she wrenched Genevieve's wrist sideways. The dagger clattered to the ground. A sharp strike to the temple. Genevieve crumpled into the dirt. Gone. Rowena was already on her knees beside Kalen. Black blood bubbled from his lips. His skin had gone the color of ash. She pressed both palms flat against his chest, directly over his heart, and unleashed her ether nature into his body. Not magic, biology. Her presence ripped the toxicity from his cells, forced the panic out of his blood, and let his alpha healing factor surge beyond its limits. Seconds passed. Kylan dragged in a massive, shuddering breath. The silver burns across his face sealed themselves shut. His icy gray eyes opened, fixed on the woman kneeling over him. "My queen." The word scraped out of his throat raw. He pulled her down into a fierce, desperate kiss, surrounded by the carnage of the gorge. High on the cliffs above, Cedric and the victorious Iron Fang Court army looked down. Swords crashed against shields, a thunderous, rhythmic salute for their king and for the Ether Luna who had just proved her supremacy beyond all question. Ethelberg was a masterwork of medieval architecture, a sprawling metropolis carved into the flank of a massive, dormant volcano. Walls of black iron and obsidian, towering spires that pierced the cloud line. When King Kylan and Rowena passed through the great iron gates, the city did not cheer. It roared. News of the Ether Luna's brilliance at the Whispering Gorge and her miraculous healing of the king had arrived long before they did. Tens of thousands of wolves lined the streets, hurling crushed pine needles and white winter roses across the cobblestones. Rowena rode tall upon a magnificent white direwolf, shoulder to shoulder with Kylan. No longer a barefoot ghost in a wool shift, she wore midnight blue riding clothes, intricate silver armor clasping her shoulders, a heavy cloak of white direwolf fur sweeping behind her. Those violet eyes, once hollowed by terror, now surveyed her people with deep empathy and iron resolve. Their first matter of business was justice. Beneath the grand throne room's massive chandelier of wrought iron and glowing crystal, Genevieve was dragged before the royal dais in heavy chains. Blackwood's golden daughter, filthy, broken, her ambition turned to cinder. Kalen occupied the obsidian throne. His presence alone crushed the air from the room. _quote _103 _. No mercy in that voice, none. Quote _104 _. Genevieve collapsed to her knees, sobbing, forehead grinding against cold stone. She looked up at Rowena. Rowena gazed down at the woman who had bathed in luxury while she rotted in a cell. No vengeance stirred inside her, only a vast, heavy pity. Death was too simple. Death ended the lesson before it could be learned. Rowena rose from her throne, her voice carried through the silent hall without effort. You will not burn. You will be stripped of every pact tie you hold. Agatha's alchemy will bind your wolf, seal it away like it never existed. And then you will be exiled across the eastern sea, cast into human territory. Her voice didn't waver. You will live out your remaining years as immortal. No wolf strength. No pack protection. No scent. You will finally understand what it means to be hollow. Silence swallowed the room, then a collective gasp, soft and horrified. For a proud werewolf, this was crueler than any execution, a perfectly measured, bloodless destruction. Kalen did his chin, a slow nod, something dark and satisfied curling at the edge of his mouth. He lifted one hand toward the guards. They seized Genevieve, screaming, thrashing, dragging her claws against the stone floor, and hauled her from the hall. That evening, 1,000 silver braziers blazed inside the great temple of Ethelberg. The night of coronation had arrived. Rowena knelt before the high altar. Agatha stood above her, draped in ceremonial robes, sightless eyes fixed on something beyond mortal vision. In her weathered hands rested a crown, silver branches twisted together, set with a single massive amethyst that mirrored the exact violet of Rowena's gaze. For centuries, we mourned the ether as lost. Agatha's voice scraped through the cathedral like wind over ancient stone. We believed the gods had turned from us, abandoned us to our own savagery. A pause. The braziers crackled. But from the darkest tower in the north, the light has returned. Gnarled fingers lowered the crown onto silver blonde hair. Rise, Rowena of House Ether! The old healer's proclamation rang off every wall. True mate to the Black Wolf, anchor of the Iron Fang court, unquestioned High Queen of Oak Haven. Rowena rose. She turned to face them all. Below her stood the most powerful Alpha King the realm had ever known, and his eyes held something that transcended devotion. It bordered on reverence. Behind him, thousands of the deadliest warriors alive. And as one body, every last one of them dropped to their knees. Heads bowed, absolute submission, offered freely to their scentless, magnificent queen. 19 years in a cage. 19 years told she was nature's mistake. Tonight she was the sky itself. The chronicle of the Ether Queen endures as proof of what prejudice costs and what destiny refuses to surrender. Alpha Alderic's frantic scheme to bury what he called a biological defect achieved the opposite of its intent. By sealing Rowena in that tower, he unknowingly shielded the realm's most critical asset from the politics and bloodshed that would have devoured her. King Kalen, a ruler forged in war and defined by conquest, discovered his true equal not in some warrior of noble pedigree. He found her in a silent scholar who taught a feral kingdom that peace could be its own kind of strength. Rowena's path from a barefoot prisoner, forgotten in a frozen keep, to the revered High Queen of Oakhaven stands as living proof. True power does not always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet, unbreakable stillness that anchors the storm. They called her a curse. In the end, she became the very heartbeat of an empire.